Okay, so now we will be entering our second panel. The previous panel, in case you were aware, was on the ethics and the lived tradition of Jain Yoga. And now our next panel will be on the textual studies of Jain Yoga. And we're going to start off with Corinna Lahore. Okay, so Corinna Lahore, she's got a master's degree and she's currently a PhD student of classical Indology and a contract lecturer for beginner Sanskrit and origins of yoga at the University of Hamburg. She holds a bachelor's degree in languages and cultures of India and Tibet with a focus on classical Indology from the University of Hamburg. And she has an MA in the traditions of yoga and meditation from SOAS, the University of London. She also has an MA in Oriental languages and cultures with a focus on Jainism from Ghent University in Belgium. Her research primarily focuses on yoga and Jainism. She's actually a specialist in this topic, and of particular interest is her current work where she's preparing a critical edition of the Yoga-dṛṣṭi-samuccaya, which is going to be excellent. I'm really, really eager to see her work unfolding in that work. Okay, so please welcome Corinna Lahore. Lahore, Corinna, you can take the screen if you like.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Ko-Jen, for the kind introduction, and hello and good evening from Hamburg, Germany. It's a great pleasure to be here and follow up on all those wonderful presentations and be among such a wonderful range of Jain studies scholars. Thank you for inviting me and having me here. So let me share my screen and hopefully it will work out as we practiced. Okay, so before we begin, I would like to make some remarks on how we can look at a text and what we need to keep in mind when dealing with a text. What is a text? What is a text in the true sense of the meaning? Actually, we can look at a text in three different ways. A text has three levels. The first level is the more idea of a text. For example, if I say it's all in Tattva Sutra, you will not have a special book in mind, but you will know the idea of Tattva Sutra. Like, for example, if a Christian who hears it's in the Bible, he will not think about the book on his shelf, but he will think about the idea of the Bible. So many of the Jain scholars, when studying Tattva Sutra, have probably used the edition prepared by Tatya. So that would be the second level of a text, an edition, a special edition, a special, let me see, maybe a range, but edition would be a good word to put it. So that's the second level of a text. The third level of a text is the actual book or manuscript. And this is my third level, Tatya, that which is Tattva Sutra copy. So basically, my presentation today is not on second millennium Jain Yoga texts, but on second millennium Jain Yoga manuscripts of one text, the Yoga-dṛṣṭi-samuccaya. Before I begin, I would like to quickly give thanks to four wonderful organizations that I met during my stay in January and February when I was in India. The Sri Hemachandra Jnan Mandir in Patan, Sri Mahavira Jain Aradhana Kendra in Cuba, the LD Institute of Indology in Ahmedabad, and the Bori Institute in Pune, who have graciously opened their libraries for me, showed me their manuscripts and their treasures. And I do not take that for granted. I'm very, very grateful that I had this opportunity to work with you guys. If somebody is here, okay, I hope I'm not doing too many mistakes now. You showed me so many things, you taught me so much, and I hope I can show some of the results that resulted from this wonderful trip.
Corinna, sorry to interrupt you. Your slides aren't advancing. Did you want to put it into slideshow mode?
Is it not?
It's just showing the title slide. Intersecting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's early enough.
Okay, so that's you missed the thank you, right? These are the the wonderful organizations that I had the honor to stay with and work with. Okay, so what to expect today? So today I would like to focus on actually two peculiarities or characteristics in manuscripts. The one is a multi-language tool, so to say, called Tabo or Palava Boda. And the other one is the characteristic of a multi-text manuscript in MTM. And I will use the manuscripts that I researched of the Yoga Pradīpa to give you some examples of those characteristics. But before we do this, let's quickly go through some ideas of Jain literacy and linguistic identity in Gujarat, where most of the manuscripts were found. And I'm quoting here from John Cord and also from Paul Dundas. The articles I used are in my bibliography. John Cord has said that to understand the Jains adequately, one must read what they read. And this is something I found very, very true, because we all know are aware of the high literacy levels within the Jain community. And this is not only at present, but it has been like this also historically. And Cord also highlights that the Jain tradition has an interactive process between texts and practices through time. And he proposes that if we study Jainism, we should analyze the ideology through the texts and the practices through observation, and the beliefs through documents and observable activities. And what I want to invite you today is I'm not going to feed you with any content of the Yoga Pradīpa, but I would like you to imagine the work with the actual manuscripts. Like we work with our books today, how have people, Jains, actually treated the manuscripts? What was the reason for them to study them? How did they study them? And what were the outcomes and results? And I know most of us have been growing up with books, and you all know there is books that we buy to put them on our shelves because they look nice, they have those nice pictures, and they have cost a fortune, but you never read them. They're just there to be beautiful. And there's other books you use to study. And if you have a look at my Sanskrit grammar book, it's like really old. You see that it has been in use. I have marked the most important things. I have put little stickers in there. So there's different ways that books look, and you will see there's different ways that manuscripts look also. Okay, before we advance, just to make you aware of language as a cultural tool, we all know that the early use of Prakrit languages was a way for establishing a Jain scriptural identity, a distinct identity back in the first century before the Common Era. Then we had a transition from Prakrit to Sanskrit to write the most important works in Sanskrit, and afterwards the rise of vernacular languages that were being used to write important texts like Old Gujarati, in response to cultural and also linguistic needs for people to understand. And especially in the first century of the second millennium CE, we see a vernacularization movement in Jain communities, and particularly the shift to Old Gujarati. And this is a good example for the dual aspects of regional literary language development and the rise of new literary vehicles among Jain authors and readers. And this culminated into an extensive literary work in Gujarati, especially poetry, by the 18th century, which demonstrates the strategic use of vernacular languages in order to reach a broader audience, to make literature, art, but also knowledge perceivable to broader audiences. And in the same way, we see that the Yoga Pradipa, it uses Sanskrit to engage with broader philosophical and religious traditions, but it also shows, as we will see, an incorporation of all Gujarati translations in some manuscripts to make the Sanskrit of the Yoga Pradipa accessible to a wider audience. So let us start with the first characteristic, the so-called Bhalava-bodha. A Bhalava-bodha is an expanded translation of an important doctrinal or narrative text from Sanskrit and Prakrit into Old Gujarati. And it is designed to make a complex religious text or complex text in themselves accessible to lay people with minimal education or new monks or munis or young learners. So it's basically something that gives you a little bit more than a simple translation. It is an adaptation that retells the story, that retells the verses, the shlokas, to enhance the comprehension and the relevance of the teachings. And it is aimed at illuminating a deeper religious meaning in a language understandable to the audience, and thus enhancing their spiritual and doctrinal understanding. So when we come to the second section, Bhalava-bodha and Tabu, we will see that the borders between those two genres, they are not really close, but there is, there's overlapping in some of their features. But I will show you some examples of my manuscripts that will hopefully help you to understand or see what I mean by this. Here, for example, you see a Bhalava-bodha manuscript, first page of the Yoga Pradipa. This one is from about the 16th century of the Common Era. And for those of you who read it, you will see that you have two sections seen by, they are divided by those words in red. You have the shloka, and then you have the artha following. The artha part is the translation into Old Gujarati. So each shloka is being followed by by a translation and with a little bit of explanation. So in this way, the Bhalava-bodhas have a literary and educational significance because they serve as a bridge between traditional Jain literature and the contemporary followers of that time, because they made it easier to learn the text and to engage with the religious teachings. So those Bhalava-bodhas are being considered a form of an independent prose, can be narrative, but can be also doctrinal. And in this way, they really enrich the Jain literary tradition. Let's see what the tabus have in store for us and have an example for a tabu. So the tabus come up a little bit later, and they become their own genre from the 16th century onward. They do have some predecessors, they called Sanskrit stabaka, and then they turn into tabus a little bit later. A tabu refers to a bilingual commentary that consists of basically a word-by-word translation of the original text in Sanskrit or Prakrit into a vernacular language like Gujarati, Old Gujarati, or even Hindi in later times. And the tabu has the function to both aid in understanding the original scriptures, but also to serve as a linguistic educational tool. So they are basically, they are language classes, language courses. And you will see that the original text is typically written in a larger script, while the translation, Gujarati or Hindi or Old Gujarati, is laid out in smaller sections, and the use are often divided. Have a look at this one. Unfortunately, an undated manuscript, but you can see that the original shlokas are printed or written in a bigger style, while you can also see the translation underneath in smaller letters. Okay, so what's the impact of the taboo? They were crucial for the monastic community, especially for those who do not have a primary education, Sanskrit or Prakrit, and they play also a significant role in the preservation and dissemination of the Jain doctrines, ensuring accessibility and continuity of the scriptural knowledge. So, and as you have seen, I guess you are of my opinion that they're really, really close to each other in definition. But if you see them both next to each other, here we have another Bhalava Buddha from the 16th century on the left, and a wonderful manuscript here in the codex format with the taboo, also originating in the 17th century. Aren't they beautiful? Yeah, and I really like this idea that the Yoga Pradipa not only conveys doctrinal aspects and contents, but also serves as a means of teaching in the true sense of the meaning. Okay, part two, the second characteristic I would like to elaborate on today is a so-called multi-text manuscript called MTM. And all of the following definitions are coming from Nalini Balbia, who has worked extensively on those subjects. And I can really heartily recommend her two articles on Jain manuscripts. They are eye-opening for people wanting to deal with the subject. So what is the definition of an MTM and what's the historical context? An MTM contains more than one text within a single codicological unit. So, and this integration implies a deliberate design to combine texts that share thematic, doctrinal, or pedagogical linkages. So, and MTMs are particularly notable in Jain manuscript culture because they offer insights into the Jains' adaptive textual practices and the educational strategies. Why was one text being grouped with another? Why do we have, what kind of collection of texts were made, for what purpose? And what was the bound that held them all together? This is something I was really interested in, and I was very curious to learn. So we imagine those MTMs, sometimes they were ordered. Somebody would pay a scribe to write books for them. What kinds of books would they choose for themselves to be in one MTM manuscript, and why? So we already heard that we have the educational tool as a reason. The MTM serve as such a tool, facilitating the learning process by providing commentaries and translations alongside root text, which helps in understanding complex doctrines and languages. And in this way, the Bhalava Buddha and the taboos also can be regarded as MTMs in the true sense of the meaning. Secondly, preservation and accessibility is an unimportant fact because combining texts enhances the preservation of lesser known works by binding them with more popular or critical texts. And it, of course, enhances the accessibility, allowing the broader audience to engage with various texts simultaneously. And all of this is, of course, very significant in a religious and doctrinal way because those texts in MTMs are often grouped based on doctrinal themes or religious practices, and therefore reflecting the Jain community's theological priorities and pedagogical approaches. Okay, here is an undated manuscript from Patan And unfortunately, you cannot see where one manuscript ends and another one begins, because it actually really begins at in the very first line. But it's still very beautiful, and you can see on the very bottom of the page how the Sri Hemachandra Jnan Mandir has added the manuscripts that are being contained in this MTM. We will have a look at this one later. So a little bit follow up on that. Learning from multi-text manuscripts, we gain insights into the Jain doctrines, because those MTMs provide a unique window into the doctrinal interconnections within Jainism, because they show us how those various texts interact to elaborate on complex philosophical concepts. So we see cultural and linguistic adaptations with the aim to reach diverse audiences by utilizing multiple languages. And we also see an evolution of Jain literary practices, because those MTMs reflect changes in Jain literary culture and manuscript production, influenced by technological, religious, and social developments also. Now, have a look at the Yoga Pradipa manuscripts that I found. As an overview, I found a collection of, it is only 25 manuscripts. I know I said it was 26, but I found a double, one that was double actually. So it's only 25 manuscripts that I was able to locate this time. And the collection spans from the 14th to the 20th century, because it also contains 3 printed editions of the 20th century from 1911 and 1920. And there is also a translation into Gujarati from the 1960s.
Right.
So all the manuscripts...
We're running to the end of time. We're about a minute over, just to let you know.
Okay. Okay, so, and we have some, we have manuscripts from 6 sources, and I want to highlight that 7 manuscripts are multi-text, featuring 1 to 7 additional texts. And of course, we have some of the multi-texts that include other Jain yoga texts, Jain bhakti texts, and texts from non-Jain yoga traditions. This is where I found those manuscripts. Here's an overview of accompanying texts. And here we have other Jain works from the first and the second millennium of the Common Era. And it's interesting to note that some are of Shvetambar and some are of Digambar origin. Here's another one. Here is a third one. And here is one of Bori, which I found particularly interesting because the other text that is accompanying is a non-Jain text, presumably. I'm not 200% sure, but it's presumably the Vivekamārtanda, an early Hatha Yoga text, which I found really striking. Okay, here is another, the oldest manuscript with a Stabaka, the forerunner of the Tabu. And that is the oldest manuscript I found, which presumably stems from 1356 of our Common Era. To wrap it all up, key takeaways I have already mentioned. Let me quickly sum it all up before time runs up. The Yoga Pradipa was a very popular text. It was popular, it was in use. It was not only used to convey doctrinal content, but it was also used to enhance language knowledge. It was dealt with, it was worked with, and that for a time span of 6 centuries. And I think this is really an amazing thing. And I just wish for this text to become as popular as it has been in the last 3 centuries, and I will do my very best to bring a wonderful critical edition to life in the next years. Thank you very much for your attention, and read the articles by Nalini Balmir, and thank you very much for everything.
Wow, Corinna, that was an impressive presentation. Your love for language and manuscripts and texts is infectious. I'm sure we all feel it deeply in our heart right now. It's so beautiful, especially with your inspiration with the Gujarati. So thank you so much for brilliant presentation, Corinna.